And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Super Inframan, Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, and Tim. Thank you so much for your incredible support.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
And welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And this is the first show of the 9th year. And as seems to be the tradition now, it is the UFO History Show. And I have with me Mike Clelland.
I'm here, thank you.
And Aaron Gulyas.
Yes, hello.
And 2020 was a weird year for everyone.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Year, for sure.
I do want to say, people have been asking me over and over, hey, can you take all the UFO history shows and put them in one file?
Good Lord.
Yeah. And so many people have asked me this, that this week I have done just that.
Oh, my gosh.
And I cut out all the introductions and all the outros, so it's just us talking about UFO history. You want to guess how long it is?
No.
22 hours.
18.
Oh, wow.
18 hours. So, wow. So, and it plays like one show. Like you introduce us at the beginning and you say thanks at the end. And
right. Well, the problem is after doing that, I'm only going to put it on YouTube. I'm not going to put it on the feed because then if people have it automatically downloading, they're going to be downloading this like 4 gigabyte file. So I'm just going to put it on YouTube, but YouTube has a 10-hour limit or a 12-hour limit, something like that. So I actually have to break it into 2 shows.
Wow.
Wow.
So I didn't think they had a limit, but then I thought about it and went, I should double check that. And it's like, oh, we didn't used to have a limit, but now we have a limit. It's like 12 hours or, I don't know, like 128 gigabytes or something like that.
Wow, whichever comes first. Yeah. So that's a surprising thing. And that would be, I guess that would be an interesting thing to listen to from beginning to end in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the sound quality changes from episode to episode. I cleaned a lot of it up where I could. And of course, just how we approach things changed.
Right.
Because it's over the course of, I had both of you on in 2013 initially, which is the first year I was on the air.
But not together. Were we on together?
No, I had you on separately. It was before your book came out, and after Aaron's book came out through Paul Kimball, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I loved talking to both of you and thought, oh, these two guys would work great together. And so we did, in 2014, we did a show on the UFO Enigma. It wasn't a history show. It was just the two of you, and we just talked UFOs. And then the following year is where I said, hey, why don't we do a UFO history show, thinking we could do it in one show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it took us 11 or 12 parts to actually encompass everything. And it would have been more had we planned on doing multi-parts.
Right.
Because we glossed through some stuff because we're like, oh, we only got an hour and a half. Or 18 hours. One or the other.
That is nuts. That is nuts.
So hopefully by the time people hear this, that's up on YouTube, if all goes well. I finished all the editing. I just got to put an image and hope it uploads all right. And YouTube doesn't give me any issues.
Wow.
That is crazy.
So people can hear 18 plus. It's actually over 18 hours, but 18 hours plus of you guys.
And you, too.
And me.
All of us.
But more you guys than me.
That's not healthy. It's just, that can't be good for your mental health, 18 hours of this.
So, that will hopefully exist by the time people hear this. So as far as 2020 goes, there were a few things I asked people, like, what should we talk about for 2020? Because it seems like most of 2020 was occupied with things like disclosure and, the collapse of, like, the To the Stars and things like that, but not anything really interesting.
No, I don't think I can recall any sort of like sightings or things like that were just like, wow, that's a good one. That came out in 20. I mean, I'm sure there were, stories of sightings that were interesting, but nothing like, I don't know, like the O'Hare thing years ago, or anything like that sort of broke through to the mainstream news, or even to widespread acclaim within UFO world. I think for the most part, like you said, it was sort of the ongoing saga of Disclosure Incorporated and the theater surrounding that, as people leave companies and form companies, and that's the news rather than something. Or I guess it was sort of January of 2021 or December of 2020, the headlines about the CIA releases all their UFO files. You mean releases the ones they've already released and we're sending out to people in the mail, rather than something new. But it was a very, and probably fittingly so, a fairly underwhelming year UFO wise. Just, and even if there would have been something relatively big, between pandemics and elections, it probably would have gotten swamped.
Well, going into this whole pandemic, we were speculating, well, we're in a super liminal time right now.
Right.
We're expecting a lot of weirdness, but I'm wondering if it really isn't that liminal of a time. It may seem like it because things have changed, but they've changed in a really boring way.
Yeah. It's the pandemic has not been as exciting as people were expecting, because honestly, when there's nothing to do and you're sitting in your house, it doesn't really it's sort of like more crushing ennui, rather than this is an exciting time of change. No, it's an exciting time of, I guess I'll watch this movie again. I don't know. I'm tired. Yeah.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
And just, I've been talking to a lot of people. So I've been in touch with a lot of people who have claimed contact type experiences and things like that. So things have not slowed down on the personal level.
No,
just on the
right.
With how it's portrayed in the mainstream and the blogosphere and such like that. Is there even a term, blogosphere? It's not, I don't know if anyone really has blogs anymore, but the online sphere, let's say.
Yeah. Well, you have a blog.
I don't put much in it lately, but I barely have a blog these days. So I have everything's archived there, but I'll do a post a month.
So let's I guess talk about the obvious one, which is the collapse of To the Stars.
Yeah, it's
not surprising.
It's not. I think it was sort of put together to get to a certain point to promote certain things, and then it sort of got to the point where it wasn't really designed to do or built to do much more than that, and sort of it. I think the fallout from it just on Twitter, you'd think that something had actually happened, but it's like, no, these guys are leaving, and they will probably, this is probably the beginning of ginning up something else that will do much the same thing, but maybe in a different direction with different media partners, and the spinning will go on, and it's interesting from the perspective of how news travels in like the UFO social media sphere, and what people find interesting and what factions there are online, and sort of broadly there's the To the Stars types who are like, this is the beginning of the real truth coming out, and then there's like the other people are like, yeah, well, maybe not. Let's look at like Mike said, he's heard a lot of this year. They haven't stopped individual stories and individual encounters and those things that are, if nothing else, more interesting than a video that the Navy releases or whatever. So there's these different factions and hashtag UFO Twitter, being up in arms about things. It's just, it's all very, bleh. I'd rather have an interesting story about a hairy dwarf, coming out of the woods or something and saying he's from Mars. But I'm not their target audience, right? I'm not somebody who's going to get excited about this, and because we've heard things like this before.
Yeah.
All the way back to, NICAP and just ever, I don't know. I have trouble getting excited about that whole world.
Yeah. Oh, so do I.
Yeah, me too. And then it's like so little emerged from that. There was the television show, which I actually just looked up. It's called Unidentified, and that's the one with Louis Elizondo and Chris Mellon are in most of the episodes, and a few other folks show up occasionally. I think I watched all of those, and I think I fell asleep every single time I watched one of those shows. It's just a style of kind of television documentary filmmaking that is so standard and so predictable and so where before they go to the commercial, they'll tell you what's going to happen after the commercial, and after the commercial they tell you what they just did before the commercial. So it just has that feel like you're I don't know, like I'm being talked to like I'm a fourth grader or something like that. But Louis Elizondo did an interview recently with Ryan Sprague on his site called Somewhere in the Skies. And it was a good interview, and the guy came across straight. It seems like he answered all the questions he could. But one of the things he said was that they canceled the show, or excuse me, they're not doing the show next year. It was a popular show. They wanted to do another season of it. And the way Louis Elizondo explained it, I'm paraphrasing roughly, he said, we said everything we wanted to say, so there was no reason to do another season. And I was trying to read between the lines a little bit, and I think he just wasn't into the TV scene, like the trying to turn it into entertainment. And he said, I'm not in the business of entertainment. And that was exactly what was right in the mission statement, as it was with the To the Stars thing. Yeah. They wanted to create I'm going to say empire, but that's, or they wanted, their business model was that they were going to have entertainment, documentaries, and comic books and music and T-shirts and hats and stuff like that. But they were definitely straight up entertainment. They were talking about doing entertainment, and their first couple of books were the fiction books, which are now, that's a few years ago.
Right.
So those books, I've kind of tried to, keep an eye on those books just to see how they're selling, and they're selling what I would consider like very poorly. Like they did not make a very big splash,
especially for all the publicity.
Yeah.
As given all the publicity, you would think that I'm sure there was a little bit of a initial sales push, but I kind of keep my eye on the book sales and things like that, and audiobooks and things like that, and they were not selling very well. The initial set of books that came out under Tom DeLonge's pen name or whatever his name, and then his co-author, I can't remember who the author, so I think did all of the work.
Well, how many of them were there? With the books,
well, there's interesting because it gets complicated because some of them are kind of speculative, like journalism almost, or what would you call it? So there's nonfiction, and then other ones are straight fiction. So I think there was a trilogy of fiction, and I don't actually know if the third one came out. I lost interest after the first one came out. I tried to read it, and it read like an X-Files episode, and what's his name? Peter Davin? No, not Peter Levenda. Peter Levenda was working on the other books, and I think one or two of those books came out, and I think I downloaded those on Kindle and never read the first one.
Yeah, I'm looking. I'm just looking at it here now, and it's very confusing. There's like these different series and volume 1 and volume 2, and good grief, 400 some pages. Wow. That's a doorstop. And I've got a lot of books to read that I've got a pretty good idea are going to be good. Things I've been wanting to read. I finally read Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles, which
how was it?
It was incredible.
Yeah,
imagine something like Winesburg, Ohio, Sherwood Anderson crossed with Twilight Zone. It's really, really interesting, sort of just like the series of shorts. My dad got it in a box of books. He got it in an auction. He's like, "You ever read this?" I'm like, "I've been meaning to since 1990." Yes, and so I finally got around to it. And it was really good. And it was better than any UFO book I've read in a while.
The mini series they did was not up to par for the book, unfortunately.
Well, the miniseries, not the miniseries from like the late 70s. Has there been one more recently?
No, that's it.
With Rock Hudson.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I have a faint memory of that. And
I've been wanting to see that now that I've read the book, but
I
haven't gotten around
somewhere,
to it.
So I'm pretty sure it's available.
I remember it was pretty. I mean, I was totally into science fiction, and I felt like I was in high school when that came out, and I wanted to like it, and it was pretty dry. I couldn't, so.
And I mean, like, if people want to read something that gels more with what the paranormal and stuff is more like, that's where I was pushing Michael Rutger's book, what is it called? It's the second one in his Anomaly series. But there are some concepts in there that are dead on for, like, what this stuff seems to be. And he's not a researcher of this stuff, but the fiction it's spot on.
Yeah, I've read of it. Haven't read it completely, but yeah, it's sort of the approach is more interesting and more oblique than what a lot of UFO stuff is. So the UFO stuff that comes from the UFO field as it is. Yeah, I think a lot of times sort of people taking sort of tangential swipes at the phenomenon yields things that are at least more interesting than the sort of UFO industrial complex churning it out.
So when did the Martian Chronicles come out initially?
70s?
The TV show or the book?
The books, actually.
The book, the 50s, late 40s, okay. Actually.
Wow. Okay, that was my thought too, because my sense it was actually the 50s is what I was going to guess.
Yeah, you could
take this part out and plug it into the 18-hour thing right in the 1950s section and keep it all linear.
Sort of retcon our conversation now into the earlier one.
So do you think that there's anything that came out of To the Stars that was actually significant?
I don't mean this to sound as cynical as it sounds, but I think it proved that there is a market for UFO media content. I think especially in this age of multiple streaming platforms and everybody charging money for their own streaming platform, they're going to need programming. And I think one of the things that To the Stars did was prove that there is an audience for this. So that might open up the possibility of there being maybe a little bit more risky or daring approaches to this in the future. If it proved to be at least as successful as whatever media conglomerate was airing it. Same thing with the Project Blue Book show. Maybe these things show that there is enough of an audience that maybe we'll get additional, more innovative UFO programming down the road. That's one of the things that sort of jumps out to me.
And that was also canceled as well, the Project Blue Book show.
Yeah. Was it popular? I'm just wondering if they had something to do with COVID or
I don't know.
I really don't know.
I loved it. I thought it was a fun sort of way of exploring the stuff. But I don't know what the ratings were.
Yeah, and ratings are so weird. Everything is so fractured now that the audience, the available audiences are so small that I've got to think they've got to look at, sort of monetizing it down the road as far as, selling downloads and probably not physical media. So, and I think I'm the only person left who buys physical media, but
you're not. Not at
I'm
all.
not. Yay. But yeah, it was surprising that they ended it. Although fiction is like that is much more expensive to produce than documentary stuff.
True.
It could have been, it did okay, but they could have gotten the same ratings with something cheaper.
Yeah, and that's often the case. I mean, when you look at Farscape, Farscape was the highest rated thing on the Sci-Fi Channel, and they canceled it because it was also the most expensive.
Right.
And they started going with weird reality shows instead. So they didn't get the highest ratings, but it cost them next to nothing to make. Yeah,
which is understandable from their point of view, but kind of depressing from a viewer's point of view.
Right. Yeah. So, Mike, what do you think? Did anything come out of To the Stars?
I just remember initially watching that press conference that they had where they kind of set it up and they were standing on a stage, and the impression was that they were in front of an audience or something, and they weren't.
Right.
And this is going back now, what are 3 or 4 years or plus more now.
Anticipating
and I just remember
COVID.
it just felt so like void of any kind of, like, they were talking big talk. They were going to crowdfund like a back-engineered flying saucer, and had all these people from Lockheed Skunk Works to like build an anti-gravity device off of online donations and stuff like that. And I just smelled like, this feels like somebody's like went into like a mania and wrote all this stuff down, and then in the cold light of day, just it nothing came from it as far as I can tell. I mean, there's been some that came out at the same time, roughly. Actually, I don't really know, but around the same time, I would have to look this up to be exact. The same time as the November 2017 article in the New York Times.
Right.
I think it was October that the To the Stars press thing came out, and then 2 months later, the New York Times article came out. And so there's this, the cynic in me is just like, who pushed the button behind the curtain?
Yeah, there's some access journalism type things going on sometimes. I thought the same thing at the time. Yeah.
And I mean, the stuff they did release was stuff that was already out there. We got a little more details on the stuff, but none of it was really significant. I mean, the Tic Tac video is the thing everyone goes to, but for all we know, that's a drone or some kind of technology that we have, that they're putting it out there to kind of pretend that we don't have it.
And to be fair, that there was one episode of Unidentified where they addressed that very idea and fleshed it out pretty fully. So in a way, like, I was left kind of like, well, what are they telling us? That there was no UFO there, and it was actually some sort of military special project that was used to, they were just letting the Navy pilots see it just to get their reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that was actually a very good episode, and it left me kind of thinking, like, what are they getting at here? As far as, like, did they just do a bait and switch on the whole thing? Just because one of the final episodes of the show.
And the thing with that too is, people are like, well, but we talked, the people who saw it talked about it, and they would know. And I'm like, no, they wouldn't. Why would they know about secret projects?
Right.
Oh yeah, the Navy would know about a secret project that the Air Force had and things like that. Yeah, so I can't remember the exact episode because I fell asleep during it. But so it had a scene. They described a scene of a helicopter landing on the deck of the Nimitz and someone taking the radar tapes, and then someone without a uniform, and then they got back on the helicopter and disappeared. And it has that kind of Men in Black kind of. I mean, that's the same kind of story that floats around all over the place in the UFO lore. That kind of that one layer deeper of secrecy, rises to the surface to steal the thing that made it into the hands of, the mere mortals.
Right. There was also, and someone reminded me of this, the story from last year about Haim Eshed, former head of Israel's Defense Military Space Directorate, claiming that Earth was in contact with a galactic federation, and that was all over the mainstream press.
Yes. That was fun. I was waiting for somebody to put out the call to Richard Boylan, who is, of course, Earth's representative to the Galactic Federation, and get his take on it. But as far as I know, nobody did. But that was a weird story, and people were saying, "Oh my gosh, this is." Some people are saying this is huge. This is a breakthrough. I'm like, no, this is kind of nuts. This is just because somebody is a former official does not mean they are not wrong and maybe
or lying.
Delusional or lying. I mean, Paul Hellyer was a pretty important guy in Canada, but that doesn't mean he was right about everything he said about UFO stuff years ago. But it's a fun story. I mean, at least it's a galactic federation instead of, here's 45 seconds of video of something. I'd much rather hear somebody talk about the Galactic Federation. Yeah, that was neat. That was and now where's that story? What happened? I mean, I'd forgotten about it till you said something, and I was, if disclosure came, would we even care?
Right.
If somebody were to say, this is what's going on, here's all the documentation. Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. And then something else would happen. And
a week later it would be old news. Yeah.
Right. It would, the news cycle would keep churning, and we'd, and the UFO people would be like, what happened? I thought this was going to be the big change, but nope. Wow. We are cynical tonight, aren't we?
Yeah. And then the thing that just came out recently, I guess we're only a month into 2021. So, the issue with, in the big stimulus package.
Oh, yeah.
There's supposedly a 180-day deadline that the new administration has to, by law, release, come clean and have disclosure. And this is coming straight from like Facebook little posts, and I never bothered to click on it. It just seemed like, yeah, let's see how this one plays out. Like, yeah. I actually didn't even have the energy to click on the link. It seemed so thin.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, okay, let's say I'm in the Pentagon, and okay, they need stuff by this date. Okay, put together the usual stuff we put out when people ask about this, and maybe throw some extra stuff in there, and there it is. Yep, that's all we know. That's all we've got. And sort of make it no real additional information other than what's already come out. And the people who are in charge of enforcing the law and overseeing that will be like, okay, we got to file by the date, law fulfilled. And other people say the DOD finally released the information because we forced the issue. And then most people be like, okay, whatever. The Pentagon, if there is something that the Pentagon knows, they're the only ones who know it. So we don't know what they know, so they could say anything.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So, but it's nice that it's in there, and it got some good UFO press. So,
and Jacques Vallee was on Joe Rogan. That happened last year too.
Yeah, I think it's very end of last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I did not listen to that.
Yeah, I don't listen to Rogan. The dumb guy from News Radio. That's always sort of how I think about him. I love News Radio. That was a great show.
That's one of my all-time favorite shows.
Oh, loved it. But yeah, I didn't hear it. I thought about listening to it, and I was like, yeah, I can hear and read Vallee all kinds of places. That's not Joe Rogan. So I was okay with that.
I watched the whole thing, and it was parts of it were. There was very little that new that came up, and as is often how Jacques Vallee speaks, he would kind of say like, "Well, I have these contacts, and I've been privy to some information, and I can only say this much," and then it never really went anywhere. You could tell he was kind of backpedaling and spinning his wheels a little bit so he didn't have to answer the question that Joe Rogan asked, because that one was a little too hot. So he'd kind of dance around it and answer half of another question in a way. So
and that type of stuff always worries me. As much as I respect Jacques Vallee, he's not beyond being kind of worked by the right people.
Oh yeah, he's definitely playing. He's on the inside for sure.
So I mean, it's kind of like, okay, his early stuff is great, but right now, like where can we trust what he says with this stuff? Is he being played by somebody? I think he's an honest guy. I don't have any doubt of that. But when he's saying, "Oh, I can't talk about this, I can't talk about that," it's like, why would they tell you?
Right?
Why even bring it up?
One thing that always jumps out at me is like, and I saw this with the Vallee on Rogan, is regardless of how little new information comes out, there are always people who sort of get very excited about the fact that it was on Joe Rogan, but it was Vallee on Joe Rogan.
Right.
It's it's breaking through. Oh my God. And I'm like, who cares? Who cares? What changes about the phenomenon based on its popularity? What new revelations do we learn based on how many people are listening to this particular interview? There's this sort of it's the old UFO status anxiety coming back. It's like, well, it's cool and I'm interested, and I think there's some really important things here to learn, but it would really be nice if cool people paid attention to it. And you sort of see that with and I love when academics sort of delve into the UFO topic, but the idea that because academics are delving into it, that now somehow your hobby is now legitimate.
Right.
Right. It's like you don't need to be that insecure about it. It was great information when everybody was laughing at you, right? So it's still good stuff. I mean, I can see why if I was in a position to make more money off it, why I would want more people interested. But
sure.
For the most part, the real action is going to take place in rooms you will never be in, with conversations between individuals you have never heard of. And that's where a lot of the real action is going to take place, as far as, important, conversations and breakthroughs and conversations that we have with people. And it's this phenomenon that benefits from being sort of looked at on a small scale. And once, people go on television or popular radio programs or podcasts and say, a small group of us are doing very important things, suddenly I'm not as likely to be excited about it. But again, I'm cynical. Yeah. So
as am I. But it wasn't just like 3 hours long, so they did kind of feel like they were talked out by the end of it. And yeah, it was worth watching, I think. But he was. I'll put my cynical hat back on again. But Jacques Vallee was talking about a book that will be coming out sometime, I think this spring in May or so. And I don't have the name of the book, but it's you could do an advance order on it. But he was basically saying, well, I can't talk about it, but it'll be in my book that'll come out in a few months.
Okay. So that explains his secrecy.
And he may have signed a contract or been asked not to talk about things until the book came out or something. So I don't think he was being coy for, the cynical reasons. I could say someone else might have been coy, but he seemed to be very genuine and wanted to say, and anyway, it's worth watching. And then, and that also dovetailed with James Fox documentary, The Phenomenon, which was kind of what amounted to an A+ documentary with, there's a bunch of little tidbits in there that were new, but it was not meant for like the audience of this podcast. It was meant for very, very mainstream audiences.
Right. And most of them are. That's the thing.
That's completely fine.
There's the one documentary that came out of I forget. I want to say Mexico.
Yeah.
Vallee was on.
Something from Another Something.
Witness to Another World.
Witness to Another World. Yes.
By Alan Stievelman was the director. That one was amazing, and
it was very good.
Have we talked about that on the show?
I don't know. We did a whole show on it. But I mean, it's.
Did you interview Alan Stievelman?
No.
Okay.
Red Pill was in communications with him and stuff, so he was a part of the show. But I mean, that's one of those things where that's not made for like the typical extraterrestrials type of an audience. It has a lot of depth and spirituality mixed into these weird encounters this guy had.
And it was on like I think it was on Netflix.
Prime, I think.
Prime. Okay, yeah. So it was like on like completely mainstream and popular as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
You know, and so that was remarkable to have that was a very subtle, artful documentary that was paced in a way that was exactly the opposite of the cable TV unidentified thing for whatever I think that was the History Channel or something.
Right.
It was exactly the opposite in tone and tenor and the sort of dedication to us sort of treating the audience as a grown-up.
Right. Yeah, the only show I will watch that's sort of that reality type of show is The Curse of Oak Island, because I'm fascinated by Oak Island, but man, does it drive me crazy. Like, they're finding really interesting stuff. And, they keep going, maybe treasure. And I'm like, who cares about treasure? Find proof people were here before Columbus, But again, like you're saying, it gets to the commercial spot and it's like, oh, what's that? Ba-boom. And then it's like coming up and it tells you everything that's coming up. And it just endlessly repeats.
My blood pressure's changing just listening to you. Yeah.
and then of course they come back and what did they find? Oh, nothing. But hey, here's all the stuff we told you was going to happen before the commercial. And it's like, just give me the content. Why do you have to flush, space it out like this and repeat it 7,000 times?
Yeah. Yeah. It gets a little tedious watching some of the stuff.
And I'll just start fast forwarding at some points because it's like, oh, look, another recap of the stuff that happened last week. Fast forward. All right, let's see what they've actually found.
Right.
Also this year, or 2020, Stephen Greer released Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind.
Oh, I
actually saw that, and
I need to watch that.
It's actually, this is going to sound terrible, but like I watched it, I can't remember anything about it. It was just more Stephen Greer stuff.
Yeah.
And that guy, so the guy can, so it wasn't just Stephen Greer, it was also witnesses and government witnesses and UFO experiencers and stuff like that. So it wasn't just him talking to the camera. There was lots of other stuff going on.
Right.
And some very interesting UFO footage too. It's tough, right? So it's edited into this big long thing. How do you what about that one thing that just flashed by? They don't really have any explanation of it, but some of the footage seemed genuinely weird. And
right.
I know someone involved in the production, and there was a very real effort to make a high quality documentary. And I have a really hard time with Stephen Greer.
Yes.
And
yeah,
but that doesn't. But at the same time, I want to be prudent enough not to, throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, there might be a lot of dirty bathwater and a little tiny baby in there, but it's like there was some. It was interesting to see a well-made documentary that addressed the subject seriously, but it's just his shadow just is over everything, and it left me a little cold.
Because the angle that it's going to be. It's going to be the disclosure angle. It's going to be the Stephen Greer angle. The book project I should say finishing up because the deadline's approaching, but I'm not close to finishing up. Is about sort of triumphalist conspiracy theories with happy endings, and I'm sort of looking at Nasara and UFO disclosure and QAnon are sort of the categories it's breaking this. So I've been neck deep in insanity for
oh my word, I'm so sorry.
A while. Yeah, keep getting my phone dings every time Lynn Wood posts something on Telegram now. It's horrifying. But it's interesting tracking the UFO disclosure movement in its sort of disclosure movement form from basically Greer kind of kickstarting it in this form back in the 90s with his SETI group, and the way this has just kept going and going and going, and it's always just around the corner.
Yeah,
just around. We're almost there. It's and now they sort of have transitioned to, well, it happened, but you just don't know about it yet. So they keep I'll use the word, they keep the grift going. That they're able to keep drawing people in and keep getting investors for documentaries and things like that. But I've heard better things about Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind than I have about some of other Greer's work. So
it's worth watching.
I need to track that down and watch it.
Well, the thing is, he makes very slick documentaries.
Right.
And if you don't know anything about the subject, they come across as really insightful. You know what I mean? I've had numerous friends who don't really know anything about UFOs be like, "Oh, I watched this. You should check it out. It's really good." And I'll be like, "Oh, it's Stephen Greer," and I'll pass.
Yeah, and that's sort of the danger, isn't it? You've got this, like, if they're going to see something and then dig more deeply into the subject, is this the end of the rabbit hole you want them to start at?
Right, exactly.
Because where are they going to end up? Which sort of brings out the question: where would you have people start? As far as well-made documentaries go, where would we have people sort of jump in?
I mean, the way I described Greer to one of my friends is he's the used car salesman of the UFO field.
Yeah.
So I mean,
he's a little more grandiose than a used car salesman, though. I mean, he's kind of like he's I've seen him talk in person, and it's a little bit like, a revival meeting. It's not a little bit like a revival meeting. It's a revival meeting. I mean, I'm surprised there's like not a bunch of like crutches on stage from all the people he's healed.
Well, he is a doctor, right? So
yeah, he is a doctor. So
he was emergency medicine, wasn't it?
Yep, emergency doctor.
Yeah.
Don't you have an awesome story about meeting him, Mike?
Have I told it? It must be in that 18-hour thing at some point.
I
do. It's not awesome, but it's kind of like it's a funny story.
It's tell the story anyway, because it's short.
Okay. I was at a UFO conference. I think this would have been around 2013 or 2012. It was 2012. It was at the IUFOC, which is held annually just outside of Phoenix in Fountain Springs. I think it's moved to Phoenix in recent years. And I took Colin Andrews aside and basically said, listen, I would love to sit and talk with you if you have a chance. I'm always fascinated by him, and I think he's a really genuine person. I mean, he's he's got a great energy to be in the room. Like, to sit and talk with him is remarkable. He just exudes this kind of integrity. So he's the guy who coined the term crop circle, and
right.
English guy who's been living in America for, I guess, the last decade or so. So he said, he was very polite, and he said, listen, now is a good time. Let's go out and sit and talk. So it's in Arizona in the springtime or February. And so it's nice to sit outside if you're coming from the north, where I was coming from. So it felt great, sit outside in the sunshine. And so I sat and talked with him, and, we shared some stories, and he told some stories, and there was some things I wanted to ask him about. And he was great. He was a totally gracious man. And then all of a sudden he looks past me and goes, Stephen. And he was good friends with Stephen Greer, and he's got a nice way of saying, like, yes, I'm friends with Stephen Greer, and we go back a long way. And yes, I understand why you could roll your eyes. I mean, he's got actually a very nice way of he's well aware of the stigma that follows Stephen Greer around. So, but just before he looked over my shoulder and said, Stephen, I was talking with him, and I got like a little, I saw like a little bug or something right in front of my face, and then all of a sudden it got caught in my throat. And in his very proper English accent, Colin Andrews said, that was a mosquito. I saw it go in. And then all of a sudden Stephen Greer is like standing right next to me, and Colin Andrews says, Stephen, this is Mike. Mike, this is Stephen. And I shake his hand and I go to talk, and I am 100% mute. I am incapable of producing a noise. I am like totally silent. It's like, and him and they talk about the dullest stuff about, the flight was fine, and I got to take my stuff up to my room, and I'll come back down here, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you. And I said nothing at all. And I wanted to kind of join the conversation, and, I wasn't going to like make fun of him or anything like that. I was, I shook his hand and said hello. I didn't say hello. I shook his hand and nodded because I couldn't say hello. And then as soon as he walked away, I kind of turned and I went, and I watched this little teeny dot shoot out of my mouth, and that was the mosquito, and I was suddenly able to talk again. So I don't know what the gods, why they struck me mute for those 3 minutes, but I was absolutely incapable of talking. So I don't know, maybe he's got like some sort of voodoo that he like can, what do you call it when the vampires do glimmer on people and they make them forget things, or
right.
Oh yeah, that's undoubtedly what happened.
Yeah, those are not the joys you're looking for of things.
All right. So one of the other things someone pointed out was how did Oumuamua? What the hell's the name of that thing? Oumuamua.
That's how I pronounce it. Yeah.
How did it affect the dialogue in the UFO community? I mean, there's still various scientists out there saying it may have been extraterrestrial. It may have been a construct of some sorts.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
The long asteroid that came into our solar system.
Oh, yes. Okay. I didn't follow that at all, so I'm backing out of this one completely.
Really, really interesting. Because it was an sort of just a space object. It wasn't really a comet, wasn't really an asteroid. It's just weird. Could have been part of a comet, or a rogue comet, or something that wasn't really on the charts, but it was huge, and it was weird, and it sort of came to, I'm not sure how close it got to Earth, but it was close, and like half a mile long, something like that, a little over half a mile long. It's pretty interesting because people are saying it could be interstellar, could be extraterrestrial. And then there are people who's like, oh, it was absolutely extraterrestrial. It was a probe. It was an attempt to communicate with us. For not knowing what it is, some people are very certain about what it is. I think it's most interesting from a sort of astronomical point of view, but I'm not sure what ongoing impact it's had on the UFO dialogue. I think some people just sort of folded it into their belief system of course, this was an alien spacecraft or a probe or something under intelligent control. And other people are like, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And some people are like, no, absolutely not. It was a natural object. It was not, manufactured in some way. Of course, a natural object could be under intelligent control as well, right? True. And who's to say? I mean, sort of looking at sort of, who was the guy? It was an English guy, but who talked about basically, that UFOs are living creatures, are biological creatures. Yeah. I forget. Oh, it's on the tip of my mind. I can't think of who that guy was, but there was a British guy back in the 50s and 60s who.
Well, Kenneth Arnold also said that too.
Yeah, Arnold did mention it too, that these might be, sort of space jellyfish or that kind of thing. They could be living creatures. So maybe Oumuamua wasn't an alien spacecraft. Maybe Oumuamua, I pronounce it different each time, was an alien itself, right? I think it's one of those things that at its best could open up sort of conversation about what might the nature of extraterrestrial life be. But most of the conversations I've seen about it and had about it are people who are sort of calcified into their, whatever mode they tend to see these things in.
So didn't it also speed up as it left the solar system?
Yeah, it did something. It did it seemed to accelerate, it was observed to accelerate. And I think this was a while back, wasn't it? I seem to remember the way astronomers sort of explained it was like it could have accelerated, or it could have just been the way we were, seeing the phase shifting, or some sort of science term, that it might not have actually literally accelerated, but appeared to. But either way, an interesting wrinkle on it. So yeah, it's the fact that it seemed to like not behave in a way that was just like sort of subject to the whims of, how everything else is subject to the whims of the gravitational waves and whatever. But yeah, that acceleration is really interesting.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Mike, or you want it?
I didn't follow it at all. Yeah, okay. No, I'm listening. I'm rapt. It seems like it was interesting, and I missed it completely. It's one of those things where, like, if there's like this kind of Facebook reality, which I'm sad to admit, you see these articles, and I it's like I'm not going to click on that thing. Some asteroid out there. Who cares? That was so I never followed up on it. So you live in this soundbite world, and you read the one sentence you can glean off of a Facebook post, and I wasn't drawn in. So.
Ironically, we could compare it to Greer's little alien that wasn't an alien, and say that no matter what it was definitely interesting.
That's going back 2 documentaries ago now, isn't it? So.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Where in the documentary they flat out say this thing is human, and then he continues to sell it like it's alien.
Right. Yeah, which is, I mean, that's
a good used car salesman. That's.
Yeah, and I think that whole episode was sort of like, I was sort of like amused by Greer, up to that point. And at that point, I was just like, I really don't like this. I have a real problem with this whole approach, including the fact that this is human remains, just.
I mean, unusual. Same with the Star Child skull. Very unusual. The late Lloyd Pye, when I had him on, though, he would, he was so insistent that this was a skull of a gray alien, and I'm like, there's no way you could possibly know that, because and I said to him, we don't have the skull of a gray alien to compare it to.
Right.
If there is such a thing. And he said, well, yeah, we do. And I said, we do? And he's like, yeah, the Star Child skull. And I went, okay.
We've fallen down this black recursive hole of, we're going to compare the skull to itself because we all know what a gray alien looks like.
Right, exactly. And I mean, but the thing is, no matter what it is, it was an interesting find.
Right.
I mean, it was anomalous.
Right. But and anomalous does not mean necessarily alien, you know, but if that's what you're locked into, it's really interesting the way people, and I think this year we've seen sort of the ascendance of adherence to conspiratorial thinking sort of really sort of come into the mainstream in a way that those of us who've been studying these fields for a long time are like, yes, we know this is how it affects people. We know how locked in people can get to a certain viewpoint, regardless of evidence. Thank you, rest of the world, for finally picking up on this. But yeah, like the Star Child skull, that's a great example because even now, years after this was a prominent thing, you see people are just, there are still people who are fully invested in the Star Child skull narrative.
Yeah. And I think the thing with, I'm trying to think of how to word this. People want simple answers.
Yeah.
And they oftentimes mistake what they believe for being empirical evidence. Like whether they just don't know the difference or they're fooling themselves. I see so many people who will say things like, oh, I know UFOs are this. And it's like, well, since none of us actually know what they are, you might be right, but you can't prove it, And I think a lot of people have trouble understanding what that actually means.
Yeah.
It's like strong belief is not fact.
Right.
And there's a contingent of, I'm just going to say, thoughtful thinkers. I'll put Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner in this, and Jacques Vallee to a degree, and then I certainly feel like I'm in this little sandbox too, where like I am totally content to take 3 or 4 steps back from the whole, big messy problem, and say, like I can just the most I can say is yes, there's a genuine phenomena out there,
right?
And it might be masquerading to be what we want it to be. Like there's no proof that these things are from another planet or another solar system. And I'm much more comfortable these days, presently, much more than I would have been even just a few years ago, just letting it overlap with fairy lore and ghosts and psychic phenomena. And I'm just like, I'm at peace with that now, where I wasn't a few years ago. And it honestly has made me a much calmer person because I don't have to sort of, squirm in my shoes to try to fit, the giant square peg into the giant round hole of the stuff that just doesn't make sense in the big mystery of things, like for instance, I mean, I'm just going to say, the number of synchronicities that people who have UFO contact, that I don't know how that factors in, how that works if UFOs are from another planet,
Right. And when I first read Kenneth Ring's book on the Omega Project, that was kind of what blew my mind there, is because he's comparing the after effects of near-death experiences with the after effects of people who believe they've been abducted by aliens, and they're very similar.
Oh yeah,
and it's like
the trauma that people go through in a near-death experience is very similar to the trauma that people go through in a UFO contact. But, they go to the other realm. They go to that other realm.
But there's also generally awakened Kundalini energy. They become electrosensitive. These are not things that just happen.
Yeah.
Psychic abilities. Their IQs tend to go up. I mean, if you're,
I didn't realize that. Yeah, I haven't read that. I've only read parts of that book, but.
I don't know if it was quite in that book. I think there was a study on near-death experiences showing that people seem to, because they become less emotional and it seems like they become a slight bit, like their IQ actually seems to increase, which you would see the opposite of, you would think, if you died and there was, a stopping of blood flow to your brain, you would think you wouldn't get smarter from that.
Yeah.
With both of them, you see a curve toward spirituality, regardless of whether they're atheist or religious. Like they move toward a more spiritual, non-specific idea afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, these are things that shouldn't be connected. And when I read the book, I'm sitting there thinking, why are these two things so similar? Like, what do space aliens have to do with people dying? But, that
there's very few people who have crossed that line and kind of embraced both sides of it. Kenneth Ring has, and Ray Hernandez from the organization Free has. But there's that's a, that those two are very similar, as well as shamanic journeying.
Yeah.
There's a book of Michael Harner, I think was his name, wrote a book called The Cave in the Cosmos, and that book reads like a UFO contact book, and it's just people going on shamanic journeys, often just with drumming noises. Just someone will beat a drum, someone will just beat the drum at a steady tone, and then there's a little set of rituals or techniques to go through a shamanic journey, and the stuff that emerges sounds so similar to things I've heard in UFO contact experiences that there's these disparate things that all seem to tie back into one core central hub of weirdness, and what that is the much more interesting
yes
thing to speculate on.
Well, I mean, I've been saying for quite a while now that I suspect that what people are experiencing is sort of a modern version of a shamanic awakening. But when you bring things like hypnosis and stuff into it, these people are unintentionally hijacking the experience with our cultural belief of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. But that's true too. If you were like in Ireland, 700 years ago, you would bring your cultural belief in, and it would hijack it. So there's nothing new about that.
But I think hypnosis did damage there, where it created a narrative that didn't exist.
Possibly to a degree. I think that that Bud Hopkins, Dave Jacobs thing, I think, is less of a the field has hopefully, and maybe I'm just hanging out with the more fun people, has matured to a degree, and that people aren't clinging to that idea that the way they would have, let's say, in the mid 90s.
True.
That's a good question. I've actually been, because I'm working on this disclosure stuff and the disclosure chapter now, and I'm doing more reading about Richard Boylan than I ever thought anybody should do. And it's just amazing how he's magically getting hypnosis, I almost said victims, patients that are having, completely opposite experiences of the sort of David Jacobs, negative, scary, alien takeover. No, they're here to help us. This is anything negative is clearly a military abduction and not a real alien experience. And so I was sort of thinking about the fact that when you said it, that we haven't really heard as much about hypnosis and that as being sort of the standard thing as we did back in the 90s. And it would be nice if the field was moving beyond that.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, I've had hypnosis, and I've had some powerful experiences under hypnosis, and I'm glad I waited. I felt like I was mature enough in my thought processes to go in and not be locked in. Like, I came away with stories that if they are literally true, then it changes everything, in the whole cosmos. It's like everything is, should be reorganized from the bottom up. But I feel like the stories that emerged for me personally, like I did two separate sessions with two separate hypnotherapists. One with Mary Rodwell, who's a well-known hypnotherapist from Australia. She's English but lives in Australia. And the other one with Yvonne Smith from California. And the story was it was like watching a rerun. It was frame for frame the exact same experience. And right from the beginning, I felt like the experience was so weird that I had to like say, well, I'm treating it like, look, instead of like analyzing it like a real event, I'll analyze it like a dream, or I'll say, "Ooh, this is an interesting story. What can I learn from this story?" And that has helped me enormously not to either turn into Kevin McCarthy from the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like running down the street screaming, or starting my own cult and becoming a guru. Like there's a middle ground there, and I feel like I just knew enough about myself to know that I just could not take this literally, though metaphorically, it's a remarkable set of stories.
Well, and that's fine. I mean, the thing is, hypnosis is not a memory recovery tool, but
Right.
it is an altered state of consciousness. So what you experience there, if you're taking it as literal memory, it's probably not, and it'll actually, your brain will actually treat it like it's more real than a normal memory. But the way you're looking at it, that's a healthy way to look at it because you were in an altered state of consciousness.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, the voice. I'm like the hypnotherapist asks me a question, I answer. Like the answer comes out of my mouth, and I didn't. Like I'll just say some stuff like, and I have absolutely no proof of this, but so the hypnotherapist would say, "How many hybrid children do you have?" And without skipping a beat, I'll go, 27. Now, does that make it real that I have 27? And I'm like, no, but you listen to the thing, and I have to contemplate, like, well, there's these things, these threads that run through the stories, and that they run through the stories of, fairies and
Yes.
and stuff
Yeah.
too. So, like, I don't need to make myself more crazy by treating it literally.
Right.
And I've talked about this, I don't know if on this show, but certainly other podcasts, and I've written about it in a book, and it's been oddly soothing for me. Here, I'll tell one little short thing. And this is if you do hypnotherapy, it's the easiest thing in the world to transcribe, right? Even if you're a really slow typer, because people talk very slowly.
Right.
They mumble. So you kind of got like someone will say, I walk down the hallway, and you can just type, I walk down a hallway. And so I told Yvonne Smith, and I don't think I've told this on this show, but it's an interesting thing. So my whole life has been, for the last decade, has been owls, owls, owls. And she said, and I told her, like, in the middle of this session, just spring the question on me at some point. Just say, Mike, what's up with the owls? And she said, sure, okay, no problem. So near the end, it felt like things were kind of wrapping up. And on many levels, you're very conscious of everything that's going on. And she goes, and Mike, what is going on with the owls? Like, here's what she said. What is your connection to the owls? And I mumbled for a little bit about being an artist and knowing the meaning of a symbol, and it was kind of all chattery. It's hard to make out any of it, and trying to listen to the audio. And then I say, the owls aren't important, as clear as I can be. It sounds like I'm like I'm reading poetry on a stage. And it's the owls are a symbol on a door. It's the door that is important.
That makes sense.
We are on this side of the door, and on the other side of the door is an infinite vastness. And I remember even in the moment thinking like not bad, like that's like right there lying on the couch. I was like, that's pretty good. But I knew honestly, it felt like I channeled that, or it came from some higher part of myself, or some hidden part of myself, or some subconscious part of myself, or it didn't come from my normal waking mind chatter, because I would never have said that. But this poetic thing came out. So that was really beautiful in a lot of ways. That segment, it allowed me to be a lot less obsessive about clinging to the owl thing as I had been for years and years and years.
Right.
There. Sorry, I held the floor for a little bit there.
And I would argue that your experience with hypnosis and your approach to what you're getting from the hypnosis, if that had been the norm throughout the 80s and 90s, wow, what a different place things would be.
Absolutely.
in this field. But your approach is so much more useful I think, and what you get from it is so much more beneficial to you as an individual than I think most of the people who went to the UFO hypnotists or the history professors who claimed to be UFO hypnotists,
Right.
than what they got, from their experience, because, you were looking for answers and solace and deeper meaning and some kind of understanding at some level, and as opposed to I think I was abducted by aliens. I want to know what happened, and so we can figure that out. What kind of alien is in the room with you, Joey? So I think what you experience is much more beneficial than sort of the stereotypical UFO abduction hypnosis encounter.
But at the same time, I've talked to plenty of people. This is something that doesn't sort of make it into the landscape. Is that I've talked to a lot of people that said the story came up in hypnosis. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. That's actually pretty normal when you actually talk to someone who's had UFO hypnosis, or what would you call it, like a hypnosis with an abduction researcher.
Right.
They'll often say, like, I don't buy it, or they'll, so that people are pretty cautious. So it's the authors, I think, that are the bigger issue than the
I was just going to say it, and it would be great if that made it into books by these people who are doing the hypnosis and were writing these books. But you don't get that impression from reading, Intruders or Secret Life or anything like that. You get, like, here's my case file of all the abductees and what they've gone through, and you don't get the people like, yeah, I'm not sure about that, and they're not the people writing the books. Yeah. Right. So I think that's another thing that's sort of skewed the field in a potentially damaging direction sometimes.
Well, so Leslie Kean was very close with Bud Hopkins. She was actually by his side when he passed. And in her book, which came out, I think 2 years ago, called Surviving Death, that has recently been turned into a
Netflix
miniseries on Netflix. It's excellent. And it is actually a very grown-up, it's a very touching show about death. And much of it deals with families trying to connect with their loved ones who have passed. It's really beautifully done and very sensitive. And I don't want to put they don't address the UFO thing at all.
I couldn't find anything like that.
Holy, my I said something in my laptop, or my iPad just thought I was talking to Siri for some reason. So, I see that show, and there's such a level of crossover between the near-death experience or the channelers or the mediums and the UFO contact experience. There's like they're swimming in the same waters.
Yep.
To me.
Well, even Keel said that way back. He said, the message from the contactees are the same messages we got from channeling and, seances.
Yep. And from the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, true.
I mean, that's like the same. The message that's in the Twilight Zone is, like whatever, like your technology is outstripping has surpassed your spirituality, and that's a dangerous place. That's like every Outer Limits episode. Yeah.
I find that most people, if they're not even people who are involved in studying this stuff, have a very hard time with that crossover between fields. It's always been said, like, the ghost hunters think the Bigfoot people are crazy, the Bigfoot people think the UFO people are crazy. But I suspect this is all one giant web of stuff. It may not be the same thing, but I think whatever this stuff is similar in how it shows itself to us. And, it's very hard to express that to people who are only watching, say, a Stephen Greer documentary.
Yeah.
Because their response will, I'll say, well, it's more complicated than that. And they'll say something like, well, I believe there could be extraterrestrial life. And it's like, that's not the question. I'm sure there's extraterrestrial life. There's an entire universe out there. There's almost certainly other intelligent life. Whether we would recognize it or not is another question. But the thing is, there's a phenomena, and Mike, you sort of said this earlier, there is definitely a phenomena that people are experiencing. That doesn't make it extraterrestrial, but it seems like people are still stuck on the No, extraterrestrials could be here. It's like, this isn't about extraterrestrials. This is
and
about...
that's like one of those things that like one person isn't going to change that, like
Right.
that's a tough one. But and then the richness of science fiction, that overlap is addressed really nicely, where these beings are somehow just higher dimensional beings, and that shows up in all kinds of fiction and such. So it shows up in a lot of video games and such. So there's a youth culture that is going to be much more suited to addressing the mysteries that way than the gray-haired people that show up at UFO conferences.
And Aaron, you had a very good question earlier. If you want to send people toward a good UFO documentary or series, what do you point to?
Yeah, I mean, as far as what's available and recent, I'm not even sure. Well, what I want to say is, well, you know what? Find a VHS copy of Farewell Good Brothers about the contactees, from like 1992. Start with that. But that's not a practical solution. The thing is, I'm much more likely to, give people, books to read,
yes,
rather than, but that's a tough sell. But as far as documentaries go,
either.
I don't know. I don't know where to start.
Because 90% of aside from Witness to Another World, it seems like all this stuff kind of has a strict ETH sort of feel to it.
It really does. And there's the like Bob Lazar and Skinwalker stuff is it's newbie friendly, but it's still very niche. And it's still sort of, especially the Lazar stuff is it's retro. It's kind of, I think it's much more entertaining for those of us who remember the first time.
Right.
Bob Lazar was a thing. But it's difficult because it is like very, very ETH oriented. And even trying to give people a good overview of the ETH, it's all very much presented as of course we know these are aliens, and let's look at the history of the aliens, and let's go to Roswell, and let's look at this and that. And it's like no. I'm not mad at the whole ETH thing as much as I'm irritated at the sense that like we've been saying for 18 hours, that this is the only way to look at it.
Yeah.
And the idea that structured craft that the government have captured and know secrets about is the only way to think about the ETH, because it completely sort of, this is my hobby horse I will ride till I die. Contactees are important and interesting, but contactees are fakey and kind of fraudy and
right.
kind of silly and are easily dismissed. And so, when they come up, they get mocked, and most of the time that whole wing of everything is ignored. But when you look at the contactees, you see that direct line to the spiritualist traditions and Guy Ballard's I Am movement and all sorts of weirder stuff, which is probably the real reason it doesn't get talked about, because it opens up this whole can of worms that takes you further and further away from aliens the deeper you go.
Right.
So it makes sense why it isn't there, but I don't know if there could be a good all-encompassing documentary that anybody would pay money to produce.
I enjoyed On the Trail of UFOs from Seth Breedlove and his Small Town
Yes.
Monsters.
Yes, I liked that. Yeah.
That was.
I didn't see that.
But it still doesn't veer too far away from the ATH.
No, I think what I liked about it was it was beautifully shot.
Yes.
I think was, it was gorgeous to look at. But also it was very ETH-y, but it was also very, very curious about it.
Yeah. It was an open exploration from someone who didn't really know that much about UFOs.
Right. And I think that's the way that it works. It works better. There's a podcast series, Strange Arrivals, I think it was called. I did interviews for it. I should remember the name of it. It was iHeartRadio did it, and it started off. The first season was sort of about the Betty and Barney Hill abductions, sort of a season on that, and then the second season which comes out in a month or two, is going to sort of take it more towards the present, but it was very much from that. You may have heard about aliens, but here's a story you may not know, because not everybody knows the Betty and Barney Hill story. So it sort of takes it as a sort of history of UFO stuff up to that point. And I was on there talking about contactees, and so it's a well-rounded thing presented for novices, but in a sort of broader, more in-depth way. Huh. I think podcast and audio stuff can do that a little bit better, because it doesn't have to attract millions of viewers on a weeknight.
True. Like
a TV documentary does, or it doesn't have to sell a bunch of copies on the iTunes store, or on something right. like that, or you don't have to hope that Amazon picks it up. But it was sort of accessible for people commuting to work. And sort of that. The podcast audience that's out there.
The other thing that keeps seeming to happen is that even in some of these really good cases, more and more doubt seems to be sown into them. I mean, we have Rendlesham seemed like a really great case at one point, and then more and more nonsense seems to flood the waters there. Skinwalker, Skinwalker was like, oh, this is the pinnacle of high strangeness, and now you got speculation that some of this was just experimenting on people, basically.
Yeah.
Betty and Barney Hill, of course, have their ties. That whole thing has ties to the intelligence community. I believe that Nick Redfern this year pointed out that there were connections with the guy down in South America, the first one that had sex with an alien.
Villas-Boas.
Yes, yeah.
And that there were intelligence ties there, that it might have been an intelligence operation.
Yeah, and I just did an episode on the Skeleton incident, where supposedly the reincarnated George Adamski comes back, and that a guy who worked with the CIA, Bosko, some Polishy name that starts with an N, Nedeljkovic or something like that. He was interviewed by Rich Reynolds back in the 70s and said, oh yeah, they talked about that. That was the guy who died from cancer. That was all a CIA thing. It was a weapon that it went bad. He shouldn't have died, but what are you going to do? And it's sort of like, the deeper you dig into this, it's like just weirdness. It's that government aspect, and that's it's an important aspect. And I think from a informed citizenry point of view, it's far more important for people to know about that kind of thing than about potential aliens, but it does muddy the waters. Yeah. Like you said, all these very solid cases that were sort of, standards. They'd be like the 5 UFO cases you pull out, like, oh, these are all sort of tainted by this, intelligence community, meddling and things like that, or fabrication or what have you. It's significant and it's important and it needs to be looked at, but it also makes it much less accessible to people who don't know anything about it, because this is a UFO story, but really it's a story about this, which I don't know. I think that makes it more interesting, honestly. But yeah,
would Mirage Men be a good one for people?
I was thinking that would be kind of, if not Mirage Men itself, then something from that direction, kind of like, here's a story about somebody who was very interested in this and what happened to them when they got in too deep. And you can tie it into all these other aspects of UFO lore that they might have heard of or seen, mentions in other documentaries. And, by the end of it, they might start to realize that if nothing else, this is bigger than there might be spaceships up there.
Right.
That it's more complex than that. And then, once you've got them hooked into the idea that this is a complex of weirdness, and some of the weirdness is human generated, that's sort of like a gateway drug to, now let's talk about, I don't know, near death experiences and, right. or, what have you. or DMT or whatever weird angle you want to pursue.
Fairy folk.
Fairy folk, yes, if we must.
Yeah, shamanic journeying. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think until people start really looking at this with a wider scope, we're just kind of stuck. I mean, with most of this stuff, we've been studying this stuff for a century. We're nowhere further than we were when we started, really.
Except we have more file cabinets full of data.
Yes.
Exactly. So we're almost out of time for this. Will you guys stick around for a short Patreon?
Sure.
All right. I don't know what part this was. I think we just started going by years after a while. So yeah, this has been the 2020 UFO History Show. And Mike, where can people find you?
You can find me on my blog, which is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com, or if you can just Google UFOs owls, I'm the first thing that comes up, and then the next 20 things below that. So yeah, I'm easy to find. I have a handful of books, and all my books are on audio now. Any day now, knock wood. My first book, which is the fattest book, will be available on audio. I had a voice actor read it. It sounds great.
Wow.
And I read the other two. Yeah.
Nice. And
But is it 18 hours long?
No, it's 17 hours long.
Oh, I was going to say,
I think 17
pretty
hours
close.
Long.
Yeah.
It might be a little shorter than that. I kind of did the math. I just was, but and it's the fellow who's read all of John Keel's books.
Oh, okay.
So it's Michael Harker. So he's got a great kind of, I don't want to say Vincent Price kind of voice, but he's got a Vincent Price kind of voice.
And Aaron, where can people find you?
You can go to saucerlife.com, all one word, and all the episodes of the podcast are up there. Links to books I've written are there. Links to everything are there. So that's the best place to go. Our most recent episode was the Skeleton incident episode, and the one coming up next week is we're trolling through some issues of Fate magazine from the late 40s and into the 50s.
Nice.
So some interesting stuff there, including is the Yeti or whatever the abominable snowman of of Tibet, is it really just a naked Tibetan lama roaming the countryside in a trance to ignore the cold? Whole like 10-page article on this. The answer is very likely. So yeah, so that's what's coming up next week on the show, or in the next episode, whenever it comes out. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you both. I want to take a moment to thank all of my patrons. Without you, this show would not be possible. And I want to give an extra special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Super Inframan, Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, Tim, Joel Thomas Runyon, Empty K, Nagatha Christie, Dorcamus Prime, Patricia W., Barbara Fisher, Will Powell, Big Boy Limina, Craig Parmenter, Walker, Joanna Rojas, Maddie, David Moore, Vincent Treewell, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Becky Trainer, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Taylor, Sam Sharon, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, Chris Ernst, Christopher Vaughn, Frank Earl, John Rutledge Foster III, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Sedgder, Dominic O'Malley, Riker and Stark, J. Otto Bullitt, Jose A., Charles Davis, Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cisternos, Ray Benedetto, Linds Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Matthew Sproul, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Carla Mahoney, and James Lattimore. Thank you all so very much. So that was our UFO History Show for 2022. However, if you are a Patreon, there's another hour that we continue this conversation about all kinds of stuff. So if you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link. It's only $3 a month, and you get extra content all month long and all kinds of other fun stuff here and there. At the beginning of the show, I had not yet created the Mega Mix UFO History Show with all the shows on it. I was in the process of doing it, and it turned into quite the adventure, let's say. one of the things I found out is that YouTube does not allow videos over 12 hours long. So since this video of the UFO history, all the UFO history shows, was actually 20 hours. So it is broken up into two 10-hour blocks. And you can find that only on the YouTube channel. I didn't put up the audio because I didn't want anyone getting stuck downloading a 2 gigabyte audio file or something. So if you really just want the audio, drop me a line. I'll send it to you. But otherwise, you can find it on YouTube, the entire 20-hour edition of UFO history, not including the part you just heard, which adds another hour and a half to the whole thing. So you asked for it. You got it. It just took some time, and video editors apparently don't really like doing 10-hour videos like that. Okay. Go to the website. Everything's connected there. We have a Discord channel. We have Twitter. We have Facebook group. We got everything. Just all the links are there. Go there. Check it out. We have merch. We have awesome shirts. And you can get the designs also on mugs, pillows, tapestries, posters. Just click on it. Take a look. Artwork by both Timothy Renner and Jeff Ritzman. Some really cool stuff if you haven't looked at it. If you want to contact me, contact at wheredidtheroadgo.com. If you have a story you'd like to share or you'd like to come on and talk about, stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. You can find me on Facebook. I'm the only Seriah Azkath, and I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.